up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Jesse Cofield hanging out in DraftKings studio in Boston. We got a great show for you guys coming up today. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us, leave us a 5-star rating, and try and catch us here live 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday on the DraftKingsNetwork.com, the YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, and more. This is one of those days I have to remind you, it is Tuesday. We know it's Tuesday. We're going to scare you a little bit because Charlotte Wilder is going to be here with us in the second hour of the show. Our good buddy from Oddball with Amin El Hassan, great basketball podcast you can get here in DraftKings Network, who normally is with us for Wilder Wednesday because of scheduling conflict, has to be here and make it a Wilder Tuesday. So don't freak out. You are not late for something. Your appointment that you had on Wednesday is not coming up today. And your only marker of time should be the history that we saw in the NBA last night, because Dad, in the middle of the dog days of the NBA season that we hear referenced by a lot of coaches and players right now as they're trying to get through January and February and approach the All-Star break and the playoffs and all that stuff, we had big men just decide to go all the way off last night as Joel Embiid and Karl-Anthony Towns put on an absolute show, headlined by Joel Embiid becoming just the 9th player in NBA history to score 70 points in an NBA game. And Dad, you know this from decades covering the sport. Anytime you're breaking a record or approaching a record or even mentioned in the same sentence as Wilt Chamberlain, you tend to be doing something pretty good.
Yeah, I would say, on and off the court, right? With Wilt, it seems. Wilt is kind of the standard of so many records that he has. So to be in that category, and 70 points, Wilt had 68 for the 76ers. So Embiid breaks that. And it is one of those things where it's the hot hand, so you keep feeding him. At some point, players have the realization of where you are and what you're trying to do. We see it in all sports, where you go for that record if you have the chance. They had the game, they've been up by double digits here, so they were winning the game, but sometimes as we'll get into Minnesota, they forsake the game at times to try and get a record. But Embiid has been unbelievable this year. I mean, he's been an MVP. He's going to be in the lead for the MVP again. His team, more importantly, because that's the only thing, and he talks about it, and you have to believe that, Mike, is the only thing he talks about is a ring, because that's the only thing evading him right now of being the best player in the game, one of the best players in the game, getting about every honor you can except for winning that title. But he was on it last night, took 41 shots, only 2 threes, and he hit one of them, 23 free throws as well. He just had it going on for a team that, like I said, they would get – San Antonio would make a little bit of a run, and then they keep them at bay. A little bit of a run, they keep them at bay, and then it was just keep feeding the big man.
I mean, well, and speaking of keep feeding the big man and what you kept at bay, on any other day, we would have talked about the fact that they were playing the Spurs. It was Joel Embiid versus Victor Wembanyama. It was two bigs. You got a great shot of Joel Embiid, who is a mountain of a man himself, who's one of the big space aliens in the NBA, walking by Victor Wembanyama in the pregame, and all of a sudden looking over at him like, what is this freak show? As he walked past and kind of stood up tall to try and size him up. Victor Wembanyama went for 33 and 7 in this game. Had a very good game in a matchup with one of the best teams in the league, and it is going to be lost in the sands of time because he couldn't even match half of what Joel Embiid did in this game. So, Dad, you mentioned it. I feel like part of this is the sports industrial complex thing where we are going, until Joel Embiid wins a ring, hold that over his head and try and render any accomplishment somewhat meaningless for him. But this feels like one where, especially at the time it came, the 18th anniversary of Kobe Bryant's 81 points, this does seem like a thing worth celebrating in the midst, because when you have the middle of the NBA season full of all these games and you get a moment like this, and the way Joel Embiid was able to do it, in contrast with what we'll talk about with Kat, who did it largely behind the three-point line, Joel Embiid is such an artist in the mid-range with what he can do, and it was on display for him even in a game about scoring as a passer last night. I do think it's interesting to stop and consider every once in a while the sort of big man renaissance, even though it looks different than the guys that used to post up on the block back in the day that we have right now in the NBA.
Yeah, I love seeing some of that, because as we'll get into with Minnesota with Karl-Anthony Towns, he took like 15 threes. So a little difference in the way a big man approaches the game. Embiid, is in that paint, and he'll certainly take the mid-rangers. But I think the other interesting thing about him last night, only one turnover. He handled the ball a lot. And just one turnover as he, again, 70 points, 18 rebounds, 5 assists, 1 steal, 1 block, and only 1 turnover to go in that game. So, and I think I've said this for a couple of decades now, Mike, and I'd like to know where you are on this. We talked about how we associate Super Bowls with quarterbacks. And to me, I think that's unfair because there's 3 parts to a game. Even though that's the most important position out there, there are 3 parts to the game. And it makes it a little difficult to say just one person is going to, let's associate. We're not associating Jerry Rice, maybe the greatest player to ever put on pads, with Super Bowl rings. He's just the greatest player that ever played, that we call him, but he's not associated with that. I look at other sports, and I think basketball is the one where that player, so I look at the sports and say, which player can have the most effect on a game, the most dominant effect? You're talking a pitcher in baseball, right? But he's still not on the offensive side, okay? He can hold down a team, but he's not on the offensive side. A goalie, for sure, you get a goalie standing on his head, you can't lose if the goalie doesn't give up any goals, but you still need somebody on your offense to score a goal for you to win. In basketball, you're part of offense, you're part of defense, you're out there the entire time. You have more effect, I think, on a game on both ends of the court than any other sport.
I think there's no doubt that that's part of the equation. And so I understand why this becomes such a dominant part of the discourse around NBA players. But I also think at times it robs us of joy. Like, you could use that to basically render this meaningless because Joel Embiid has not yet climbed the mountaintop. And so he doesn't get to be lauded for this the same way a guy like Kobe Bryant was back in the day, because Kobe was a multiple-time champion and because he had already checked off the boxes that we deem necessary for you to be seen as someone of value on an NBA court. And we're still going to have questions about Joel in the postseason. I saw somebody on Twitter very cruelly call him the NBA's Dak Prescott. But I still think in these moments, especially when you see how he goes about this and the way someone his size can make basketball look, I still like to be able to stop and be impressed by that, even if we know the ultimate, and even if he knows the ultimate goal. Like, Philadelphia is blessed to have 3 athletes right now under its umbrella that all kind of get the city between Bryce Harper, Jason Kelce, and Joel Embiid, who understand what it's about and in their own way approach the city in a way that really, I think, endears them with fans. But yes, I think you're absolutely right on that, Dad. I don't think it's particularly close.
Though while I'll stand by that to argue against my own argument, rarely in it's been for a while now that one lone superstar can help you win a title, though, right? You need a partner. You need a Batman or Robin, or sometimes you need 3 on that team to win nowadays.
Well, I guess that's why in the wake of what Denver did last year, it does feel like that's a little bit different, because Jamal Murray's a great player. There are other guys on that team, Aaron Gordon, that helped out, but that was the Nikola Jokic show. And so now for Joel Embiid, it does become complicated. Well, it doesn't become complicated going forward. For Joel Embiid, he knows what's at stake here. The team knows what's at stake here. And they are a team right now that has had the bulk of this core together for a while. They fought hard to keep a guy like Tyrese Maxey around. Tobias Harris has been there, and it felt like been the subject of trade rumors for years, as people will they, won't they, about the success of the money that they've given him. But the job is pretty clear for them, and the question still remains the same, is can you get this same version of Joel to show up in the postseason when usually by the end of the year, a guy with his size and injury history is feeling the effects of those things and starts to slow down this level of production, because the level he's producing at right now is the greatest of all time. He's the reigning most valuable player, and he's on track to have the greatest scoring season in NBA history. Through 2 games, he has 32 games, excuse me. He has 1,156 points in 1,096 minutes. That's a pace of more than a point per minute, and it's something that only Wilt Chamberlain has ever done in the history of the NBA. So that's how he's followed up the MVP season. And Dad, I do wonder, do you feel like the NBA is going to look pretty dumb if their little 65-game rule gets in the way of a guy who looks clearly like the most valuable player in basketball from winning the award for the most valuable player in basketball?
Yeah, I mean, it would be somewhat odd. Now, again, if a player plays 40-some games, you could see, it's not enough of a sample size to get. It's all, but remember, and again, I'm not getting into it. Go ahead and read it yourself. There are some caveats to the 65 games to where you can still win. But I agree with him. I mean, he won it last year. His thing is a title, right? They're still sitting 4 back from Boston. They're 3rd in the conference behind Boston and Milwaukee. So we know that's the battle. So we know with Embiid, it's going to be been here, done that in the regular season. You know, you're 3 points better than you were even last year when you won the MVP. You just had a monster game. But now the next level is set. It's kind of, excuse me, where we are with Lamar Jackson, right? Lamar Jackson's going to win his 2nd MVP, but we keep talking about the failings in the playoffs. And if they don't do it again, it's going to be again. This guy's one of the best players in the league. He's got a couple of, multiple MVPs, but can't help get his team, where again, I'll say it's unfair to put it all on a quarterback, but that's what we do to say, okay, we're all waiting for the next step now. We know you're good up to this point, but when can you get us over the hump? And he's going to have to do it this year with, like you said, with Maxey, with Harris and those guys to try and win this title.
He is, but he's going to do that now with the distinction of having the best single-game scoring performance in 76ers team history under his belt. Worth noting, we mentioned he passed Wilt Chamberlain, who had the top 3 scoring performances until that point. It was Wilt Chamberlain and Allen Iverson, and now Joel stands on top of that list. And Jesse, we did mention it came on a very sort of poetic day, as it was the 18th anniversary of Kobe Bryant going off for 81 points, which felt attainable for another NBA superstar at the beginning of last night.
Yeah, and Embiid said post-game, he was like, Kobe was my favorite player growing up. He's why I got into basketball. But the best reaction of the night, we got to talk about this. It came from KD in the post-game presser.
I don't know if you saw Joel Embiid score 70. Cat had 60.
70?
Yeah, Joel had 70 today.
58 through 3.
Yeah. He had 70?
Yeah. So what did nights like tonight mean in the NBA?
I seen Cat have 40 at half. I mean, the skill level in this league is insane, and actually the coaching, the schemes on offense is insane. You're seeing so many different sets being run for bigs to get threes. I mean, coaches are being way more creative to put their best players in great positions to get those numbers, and you got shooters all around the floor. You got penetrators. I mean, this is the peak of basketball in my opinion. You're seeing it what guys doing.
Yeah, Cat ending with 62. And Durant actually had 43 points himself in that victory over Chicago. But then he's getting told what the other guys are doing. He's like, oh, man, not so good. You thought you did good, but not quite so good.
True.
They were just there was something in the water last night, just handing out like candy. Everybody had points aplenty. And with Kevin Durant, we're sort of numb to that because he's one of the greatest and most effortless scorers we've ever seen. But, Dad, he kind of hit on it. In a day and age now where you've got bigs that can space the floor and shoot, it does create such a weird math problem for teams defensively, and you've got to cover so much ground on the floor because of how people space it and because of how analytics have changed the way that we approach scoring in basketball. But it's remarkable to see. And watching this last night, I was watching the Joel Embiid game, and I tweeted something about him having, whatever amount of points he had at halftime of that game, and then immediately just started getting well-butted by what Karl-Anthony Towns was doing in the first half of that game that they eventually lost. That was the mind-blowing part for me. And let me tell you what, the only person whose mind was more blown by this was Chris Finch, Minnesota's head coach, who after the game went all the way off on his team, calling them immature and saying their performance was disgusting. Listen to this.
It was an absolute disgusting performance of defense and immature basketball all the way through the game. So it really didn't slip away. It had been there from the jump. So this is what happens when you have this type of approach. There's always a lot of ways to be immature, and there was a lot of immature performances here throughout the roster. We totally disrespected the game ourselves, and we got exactly what we deserved. So,
Dad, do you question the approach at all here from Chris Finch?
No, because he's a coach, so I get it. Again, for those that don't know, Karl-Anthony Towns, he had himself an unbelievable game at 62 in this game. What a difference of two bigs. We said Embiid took 2 3-pointers. Cat took 15 and made 10. He got to the free throw line 14 times, and Embiid 23. That's a difference of Cat shoots way more from the outside. So two different approaches. So, and here's a team that's leading the West. They're 30-13. They're leading the West. So sometimes you get a little more comfortable, or when you get a guy like this going off. I'm not going to lie. As a player, I hear the coach saying that. He probably said it for effect in the locker room as well. But I'd be like, you know what? I'm cool giving up one here to see what we can get Cat to go. You did blow an 18-point lead in the fourth quarter. Karl-Anthony Towns was 2 of 10. And basically what Chris Finch is saying is, they kept force-feeding Cat. He was shooting horribly in the fourth. Even though they were coming back on us, we kept going to that well that was missing in the fourth quarter when we should have been doing other things. I'm like, you know what? I'll take a chance on this one. We got an 18-point lead. Let's feed this dude and see how much he can get.
I think there's something to that, and you can call it team morale or anything else, but I heard Candace Parker was on the halftime show of NBA TV for the Sixers game and was talking about approaching records like this and said, you don't get many opportunities to touch this kind of air, and she believes that because the rest of us in the media and the fan bases are so historically inclined now and constantly throw records out at people, that players have kind of seen the importance of that too and understand when they've got an opportunity, they usually want to go get it. And so I can understand that mentality of man, if I'm feeling it, and 44 points in the first half, there's a lot that's possible for you if you keep up anything even close to that. I kind of get it from their standpoint, but especially as a teammate over the course of a long season, Dad, and this is the part where you and I have a tough time identifying playing football where you've got comparatively fewer games, is over the course of a season this long in the NBA, I'd imagine you got to find different stuff to keep you interested and engaged as it goes. And a guy dropping 44 in the first half feels like a pretty easy way for everybody involved.
And I don't know if I don't know Chris Finch, at all. So I don't know if he was doing that publicly and behind closed doors. He was like didn't have a problem with it. I have no idea. But
that seemed like a guy that was trying to send the message to his locker room through the media right there.
I agree. And I'm not going to lie, I don't know how that message was received. It would be like, okay, yes, coach, okay. And then when the players are by themselves, they're like, hey, we do that any day of the week and try and get this done. So and it's done in other sports. Remember, Christian McCaffrey had that record tied for consecutive games with a touchdown. Yeah. They ran him 3 straight times by the goal line, didn't get in. Puka Nacua, the last game of the season when everybody was sitting, when the Rams had made the playoffs, he had a couple of rookie records. I remember he needed 4 receptions and 29 yards. They got him 4 receptions and 30-some yards and took him the hell out of the game. So you're right. Players, organizations, they know these things, and I don't mean bonuses money-wise. Puka was going for actual records. So that coaches even know that, say, okay, it is hard to come by, so let's give it a shot while we have the chance.
And I can understand for Chris Finch, because you mentioned, like, for anyone else pulling themselves out of the football vortex right now and checking the NBA standings, like, you're not seeing things. The Minnesota Timberwolves are the number 1 team in the West. The Rudy Gobert experiment and the Kings ransom they gave up for him seems to be paying off, but it didn't last year. They weren't a good basketball team last year. A lot of us looked at that as a failure. And so when you're the coach that's part of trying to turn that around, I'm sure you're trying to instill things on a daily basis. Your superstar in Anthony Edwards is young. He's a big-time personality, and I'm sure part of your life is spent trying to corral and rein him in, which good luck with that. And so I can understand why maybe on a team with that much personality, he's got to sort of play that bad cop role. Yeah. But every once in a while, it's probably cool to just look up and go, oh, yeah, dude was balling. We've got 82 more of these things. I think we're going to be okay.
Just feed him the ball. It's a shame, too, that it got cold in the fourth quarter. And a shame, too, they ended up losing the game, like I said. But it would, if he stayed as hot as he was early, what he could have ended up with.
Yeah, these kind of records, for him to fall short of Embiid's 70 points after grossly outpace him early in the game, and then managing to lose that one does make it a lot less cute. I will say that. So Chris Finch is at least on to something there, that it don't mean a thing if you don't get that ring moniker kind of applies to baller scoring performances and actually winning the game.
GoJo and Golic. The Titans have found their new head coach in Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. Callahan, of course, replacing Mike Vrabel, who was fired on January 9th after 6 seasons. Callahan had his second interview with the team on Monday, and Tennessee did not let him leave without a job, apparently. Didn't want him to walk out of the building without that job. Guys, he has 14 years of experience in the NFL. He's been the Bengals offensive coordinator since 2019. He's credited with aiding in the development of Joe Burrow, who's pretty good at football. So what do we think about the Callahan hire, guys? He's worked with some prolific quarterbacks here, but also not a name we saw being tossed around a lot when we were talking about, who's the hot hire in this offseason.
Well,
I think it kind of fits, Dad, with what we had heard people surmise that Tennessee might be looking for, with Rand Carthen now taking over as the GM this last season, wanting to give him the biggest voice, I think, in personnel decisions. Going up against a big personality like Mike Vrabel in the building probably was pretty difficult. So I think the thought a lot of people had was they wanted someone who would be more willing to go with the program and just do their portion of the equation. And a guy in Brian Callahan, who's certainly going to be a hot name this cycle, but maybe not the first one that came to mind for a lot of people, might fit that role pretty well, especially coming from Cincinnati, where he was a part of building that Joe Burrow-led offense.
Well, you sit there and you look at what teams do a lot of times, and a lot of times they'll go oppo, right? Vrabel, a defensive-minded coach, a defensive coach. Callahan is an offensive guy. Callahan broke into the NFL with Denver and was there for, I think, 5-6 years, started at as just a coaching assistant, ends up as an offense assistant. But through his stops with Denver, with Detroit, with the Raiders, he worked with Peyton Manning, Matthew Stafford, and Derek Carr, and got them all throwing pretty well for a whole lot of yards, and then ends up with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. So we see what he's done on the offensive side of the ball. And as I said, a lot of times a team will go the opposite way. So then the thing you look for first, because the offensive side is taken care of, and he'll probably be a guy that's going to call his own plays there. It's then, who do you get on the defensive side? So who's going to be the defensive coordinator to run that side of the ball? But it's a coaching family. Listen, his dad, Bill, was coaching around in the NFL when I was playing. He's still the O-line. I think it was the O-line coach in Cleveland, I think, right? I mean, he broke into the NFL right after I left. I left in 94. He ended up with the Eagles in 95. That was his first NFL gig, but he was in college for a bunch of years before that. He was a head coach at Nebraska as well, the interim head coach for Washington, head coach of the Raiders. So certainly the family tree here in now Brian getting that head coaching shot.
And I just was looking at their resumes, Dad. It doesn't look like they've ever coached together anywhere before.
They have not.
As they've gone along. That should, if you're a Titans fan, you're praying to God that changes now, because one of the areas you really struggled this last year was offensive line. You had a lot of turnover there. You drafted Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern, who was a big bright spot for them now. And I'd imagine Brian's first call is going to be to his dad, Bill, who last time on Dragon Ball Z, I don't know if y'all have looked at the program they've built over there at Cleveland, pretty darn good offensive line program. Brian's been a guy that, or Bill, excuse me, has been a guy that I think was one of the early coaches for Zach Martin in Dallas too. So that's pedigree. Yep. And if you can get a guy like that, there aren't that many offensive line coaches in the league that are meaningful skill developers in a way that makes a difference and moves the bottom line for your team. And that would be a huge coup for Tennessee to be able to pull him out of this coaching cycle as well.
So let me ask you a question. If we were coaching in the NFL and you ended up getting a head coaching job and I was an assistant somewhere else, would you bring me to your team because you wanted me to coach on your team because you thought I was a good enough coach, or you would be my boss? That's why you would bring me on the team, that you would now be able to lord over your father. And answer honestly.
I'm going to go C on this one. I'm going to go off the board, because if I didn't, Mom would kill me. And I don't want to do anything that's going to tick off my mom. So this is one of those things we all know who we have to keep happy. And if I didn't hire you, then I would have Mom breathing down my back asking me what the hell was going on.
That's a good point, because she would say, hire your father and get him the hell out of the house, okay?
Yes.
Need him out of here, yeah. But I agree with you. That would be awesome. And I'm sure Bill would love to go work for his son. I think that would be awesome. I mean, any father would love, that for their kid as well. So congrats to him. You're right. Brian Callahan wasn't the name that was out there. It was Slowick. It was Ben Johnson, whose names are still out there, and others. You didn't hear Callahan a lot, but he has been successful with the coaches he has worked with through his what would be kind of equally short time. He's only been in the NFL as a coach since 2010. That's a short time compared to a lot of these coaches, but we are seeing younger and younger coaches. A 39-year-old first-time head coach. So this is kind of the way of the NFL now.
It certainly is. So congratulations to him. I know Zach Taylor spoke very highly of him in the role he's played in helping build their offense in Cincinnati and building around a player with the magnitude of Joe Burrow. But, Dad, while we're on coaching hirings, we forgot to touch on yesterday, coming off the weekend that had so much football built in it, that at the end of last week, we had the news on Friday that the Las Vegas Raiders made it official, and they announced that Antonio Pierce would take the interim tag off and become their full-time head coach for the team after going 5-4 down the stretch of the season, including 3-1 in division, and giving Raiders fans a lot of hope. And we've talked a lot this coaching cycle, Dad, and I think through the lens of Antonio Pierce, about the value that leadership plays in the room, your ability to go out there and motivate the 53 guys on that roster that, especially in Las Vegas, seemed like they were as empty in that barrel as possible coming off Josh McDaniels and the way that he didn't get along with that locker room. So how much of a chance do you think he has to replicate the success we saw at the end of the season over the course of a long year?
So he had pretty good numbers, and I don't think that's the reason. But that he got this job. Obviously, it's part of it. So again, they went 5-4 under him, 3-1 in the AFC West under him. During his time in his 9 games, the Raiders led the NFL in fewest points allowed per game at 16. They had 4 defensive touchdowns. That led the way. They had the fewest penalties, which is a stunner for the Raiders, while having the 10th most takeaways. And they also had 30 sacks in his time as well. That's the 3rd most toward the end of the season. So they played better. But I think the thing here, and why Davante Adams and Max Crosby publicly caped for this guy, was they just loved the way he ran the locker room. Now, it was a complete 180 of just how bad it was with Josh McDaniels. I don't know if I've seen 2 coaches more disliked in locker rooms than Matt Patricia in Detroit and Josh McDaniels with the Raiders. I mean, it's been amazing. So just from that standpoint, how players are treated, and I think that's the big thing. They had some good results, but a head coach is so much more than an X's and O's. That's that CEO. That's the guy that, you want to say inspires or motivates. Again, these are pro athletes. You think they should be able to do it themselves, but it's certainly nice when you respect a coach that much that you'll run through a wall, as Davante Adams said. I run through a wall for this guy. I mean, that's great stuff, especially for a guy in Antonio Pierce, who's not that far. He's been out of the game for a while, but still on the younger side. I love how the relationship he has with the players. And again, Mike, he had a modicum of success, right? Going 5-4 and some of the numbers I just had. So it wasn't all just, he's a good guy, let's keep him around. They did get some positive results.
They did. It only gets harder now because you've got questions that you still have to answer at quarterback, and you've got a full offseason where now he's going to have to be a part of all that other stuff. He went from, and I think that transition, Dad, we always talk about this, you don't usually spend a ton of time with your head coach one-on-one in a team setting. Right. And so he had the advantage of being one of the coaches that was on the staff there, where you get to have a different relationship with the players. You are usually closer with a lot of those guys, and that carried over to his time as the interim head coach. Is he able to maintain that? Especially because he's not going to be a guy that's calling plays. Does that give him the ability to float to more areas of the team, to maintain that pulse of the locker room and use that to his advantage? Because ultimately he's still going to be defined by how do they fix the quarterback situation and where do they go about talent acquisition when it comes to this spring. But he's got the rest of the intangibles that are sometimes the hardest part to find in these coaching searches. He's got that nailed down.
Yep, and the one thing now, young coaches, the important thing is who do you bring in as your coordinators?
Yeah, I think that's as fascinating as anything for us to pay attention to as we get to that portion of the NFL coaching carousel, is who are these guys bringing in-house to make it work? Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr. here. And Dad, we talked about a lot of the coaching hires here, but there's a name that popped up among the GM hires in the front offices that looked a little bit familiar to football fans of a certain age, and a guy that you actually had a pretty close run-in with back in his college days.
Yeah, Dan Morgan, and shame on me, I didn't know he was obviously going the path of this, because he certainly has been a great college player and first round pick in the pros back in 2001. He was 11th pick overall, and then he's been started out as a scouting intern in 2010 with Seattle, worked with them, worked with Buffalo, director of player personnel, and then Carolina as the assistant general manager. Now the general manager. This was a guy, Mike, and I'll be interested to know how he's been handling, or will now, as the GM of the Combine, and if some player says this to him. Because I was, back then, I was at ESPN, and I was, as well as doing radio, calling college games. And his last game in a bowl game, I covered it. You know, if you're done after that with that school, you can leave and go separately after the bowl game and such. So I'm at the airport, and I run into him, and we're talking about, hey, hell of a career, blah, blah, blah. I said, you know, you're looking forward to the Combine. And he was like, basically, you know, I'm not doing anything there. You know, I'm not running, or I'm not. He goes, I had 40-some starts. He goes, I got enough film on me that they can go by. He goes, I got no reason to do anything at the Combine. And I'm like, all right, I love that attitude, because he's right, man. You know, they have all that on him. So you either don't go to the Combine, or you just go there and just do interviews and hang out and don't do any of the work. So I'll be interested when a player says to him, you know, at the Combine, yeah, I'm not going to be doing anything because you got enough film to watch on me to see what Dan's reaction will be.
I was going to say, I'm sure part of him will smile, remembering what a young Dan Morgan would have done in this situation. But now the part of him that is tasked with the hopes and dreams of an organization manned by one of the most hyper-aggressive billionaires in the NFL going, hey, I really need as much information as possible to show my boss. So if you could help me out and just run at least 140, that would be really great for me. And I would really appreciate it. Because it's one of those things where so much of the Combine, Dad, is, in my mind, trying to confirm baselines for guys and what they need to be successful at the next level. But part of it is also like, hey, you need numbers to show your boss to know that I can make stuff work. This guy falls within safe parameters of the physical for physical parameters. We need to be successful in this league. So let me take him for the cost of like $30 million with the second overall pick in the draft. Going to be interesting how Dan navigates that one after being young and having the approach that, like you said, is what you've always viewed the Combine as, and kind of its role in this process.
And I understand, the great Bill Polian, one of the great GMs of all time, used it for just what you said, kind of guidelines. But even guidelines can be off. You're expected to be a certain height or a certain weight for a certain position at a certain speed to fit into that. We know that doesn't happen. How much did Kyle Hamilton get ripped for a slow 40 at the Combine, right? Or the Pro Day? Was it the Combine or the Pro Day? Either one.
It was the Combine.
I mean, my God, who cares? Watch him play. Watch his makeup speed on the field. I mean, that's the stuff that just irritates me when you're not in that box. You're kind of and you're kind of cast aside, and that just is an aggravating thing to a player who gets it done on the field without having some of those markers.
So and I just had the light go on here as you were talking, Dad, realized that as we've been talking about the rash of linebacker hires at head coach in the NFL, we've now got linebacker GM as well. So it really is something in the water in 2024 that's got guys that used to go downhill and shorten necks getting in these positions of power.
Well, I mean, think about it. You always usually have the linebackers. Now you have safeties at times calling the defense. So they're kind of been the quarterbacks of the defense, right? And have to kind of know what everybody is doing. So I guess that kind of follows suit, because you're right. There has been a glut of them.
Yeah, we talked to Clay Matthews about that last week and mentioned that. And he said even the difference of guys that played that middle linebacker spot, because Clay spent so much of his career at the start on the outside. He said, I just kind of got to do my thing on the outside. But when you're in the middle, you do have to be able to talk to everybody. And I do think at a base level, as we're talking about a lot of this, it's your ability to relate to and motivate people in critical situations. And that comes directly from that experience in the most insane crucible possible, where it's got the physical toll. We're in the middle of the battle that is a football game every week. So it is one of those things where it doesn't feel like we're having to force that. That's a skill set that makes sense in the way that it translates. A lot of the same way we talk about point guards who end up making that transition right from the NBA to head coaching the way we've seen a little more often as of late. So congratulations to Dan Morgan on that. Dad, while we've got a minute, we're coming off the divisional round weekend. We're getting ready for conference champions. We'll have plenty of time to look ahead from that. We'll take a little look at the matchups with Charlotte when we get her coming up here in the next hour. But we do have a bunch of teams now that are on the way out between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and others. And Jesse, they've got a lot of questions due the teams that just got shown the door that are going to start to mount up this offseason to try and determine whether or not they can make a trip back to the dance next year.
Yeah, the Bucs are headed into the offseason with 18 unrestricted free agents, okay? We have some notable ones up here for you to take a look at. Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield, Antoine Winfield Jr., Loante David, Devin White, Chase McLaughlin. So it's a lot, and according to overthecap.com, Bucs are expected to have $47 million unofficially in cap space this year. So they're entering this offseason, like we said, with a lot of questions, okay? So do a lot of the other teams, though, that were knocked out over the weekend. So what I want to know is, of the teams sent home in the divisional round, you guys, who do you think is most likely to be back next year?
Well, Dad, based on the questions they do or don't have to answer, I'd say Green Bay's in pretty good position for that, right? Without having a young core of your roster get there a year early. Now, there's always a chance for regression, but in a division where you're going to see probably a change in quarterback in Minnesota with the Vikings and what they've got going on, the Chicago Bears are in the middle of that kind of transition as well, and really just you and Detroit eye to eye right now more than likely, I would say they've probably got the best shot, even if I'm not going to really bet against the Buffalo Bills because no matter what, they're still going to have Josh Allen under center, even though he's going to eat up more of the cap starting next year, and they've got a lot of questions themselves in terms of free agents.
So of the divisional round, of the 8 teams that were there were kind of 3 that were like surprising, right? The Texans for sure, Green Bay was surprising, and Tampa Bay making it to divisional round. I think they were all surprising. Tampa Bay was paying the price for a couple of years because they kept signing everybody while Brady was there, right? You knew they were going to be in financial hell, and now 18, as Jesse said, 18 free agents. So now you have some decisions to make. You can see some changes on that team. Houston is a young team that will continue to build with the young core around them. But I lean to you. I say Green Bay as well. I mean, of the 10 players that were targeted with a pass for the Packers during their divisional game, their loss to San Francisco, 9 are on rookie deals. So, I mean, I did them the last 2 weeks and couldn't have spouted enough the amount of rookies and second-year players catching the ball for them that they have, and a quarterback that matured so much. I know he tried to make the hero throw at the end of that game. It happens, right? There are vets that do that as well. He shouldn't have done that. I'm sure Matt LaFleur has talked to him about it, but you can't deny the season that he had, especially not turning the ball over. So when you look at the teams that lost in the divisional round, I think while the Texans are a young team growing with them, I think the production we saw at a youth in Green Bay and the amount of players they have with a quarterback who it's definitely his gig, right? Because we're talking about those teams too. He's the quarterback in Green Bay. The quarterback is C.J. Stroud is the quarterback in Houston. And it looks like Baker, at least for the near future, is going to be the guy in Tampa Bay. But I definitely lean toward Green Bay in this.
And you're seeing why teams that have young quarterbacks they're trying to build on sometimes err on hiring an offensive-minded head coach who can call plays, because what's going to happen to C.J. Stroud next year? He's going to probably have a new play caller in his ear because Bobby Slowick is going to get poached by someone for their head coaching opportunity. And so now early in his career, the voice is going to change for him. And while he's still great in the personnel they're going to have there in his offense, they're going to get Tank Dell back next year. Nico Collins showed a lot in this team. They're going to have resources. But Matt LaFleur, who has given a lot of credit, and rightly so, for the way Jordan Love has developed in that Packers offense and what he affords him, he's still going to be the same guy that's working with him this entire offseason. And so that's one of the other factors that starts to creep in for all these teams as the coaching carousel spins around.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. So the Lions are making a key signing before the conference title game, going out, apparently bringing on Zach Ertz, okay? 3-time Pro Bowler, started his season with the Cardinals. He was cut in late November after he requested to be released. He's expected to sign with the Lions practice squad, then be elevated for the NFC title game. That is according to NFL Network. His addition to the team is coming after Lions tight end Brock Wright sustained that forearm injury in the divisional round victory over the Bucs. So, guys, obviously great to bring in a veteran. Can only help your chances to make it to the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah, it's certainly, and I mean, Lord knows this is a team that knows a thing or two about the use of tight ends, so a pretty cool place to wind up on this, Dad. But it's always interesting doing the calculation on this, because didn't you have a chance to sign with someone who would have been a contender late in a season like this, about how you feel about joining onto a team and getting a ring when you're probably not going to play a ton and haven't been there for the entire season?
Yeah, the difference was I was released and didn't ask to be released. Zach Ertz asked to be released from Arizona so he could maybe hook on with a contender. Remember, he already has a ring too. He won a ring in Philadelphia. But yeah, I did. I was released by the Dolphins after the 93 season. So the 94 year, I ran for a couple of teams during the season. And I think it was about week 12, I went and ran. The 49ers had an issue on the D-line, and I went and ran for them. Unfortunately, in the next game they played after I ran for them, I think another player got hurt at another position, so they brought in a different player. And they went on to win the Super Bowl that year. And, yeah, I mean, would it have been great to go through that experience? Yes, it would have, because I'm jealous all the time of people going and winning Super Bowls. But it would have been great to be a part of it, but I wouldn't have felt a huge part of it, right? I would have been there and played a spot player, and it would have been, like I said, a great experience overall, but I wouldn't have felt like I would have felt when I was in Philadelphia, when we were all together. You know, we won that title as guys being together for a while, of how you would feel. But for Zach, I mean, he kind of chose this. He kind of said, all right, not happening in Arizona. My career is coming to an end. Let me see if someone will want to, sign me to make a run. And this worked out for him perfectly, not so much, for a Brock Wright, who had one catch for 29 yards last week. Normally a blocking tight end out of Notre Dame, had a nice catch, kind of got, the opposing team gets fooled a little bit, and all of a sudden to go into Brock Wright. Laporta still got that knee working, so you never know what's going to happen there. So you have a veteran who's been through all these playoff games, who's been in a Super Bowl, certainly isn't what he was at the height of his career, but can come in and I'm sure give you enough from a guy who's been there, done that in this situation.
And eventually your Wikipedia page will just say 2-time Super Bowl champion, and people will forget how you got to that second one if it did come down to that. So seems like a worthwhile investment if you are Zach Ertz. And like you said, I'm sure Lions fans are hoping, based on all the other factors you mentioned, that they don't have to see Zach Ertz out there all much, and that this is just an insurance policy as they get set to face a 49ers team this weekend that's been the boogeyman in the NFC for a while. And Dad, while we're on the subject of the Lions, why don't we get to a little segment that we like to call Yums and Tums around here? It is sponsored by Tums. With Tums Fast Heartburn Relief, your favorite foods are never a gamble, and the Lions certainly not going to gamble on the tight end position, but also not going to take any chances when it comes to making sure that their fans are properly fed during the course of a game. Dad, did you see the picture of giant sandwich Lions fans that started going viral during this game?
Unbelievable. I mean, listen, as foodies that we are, how could you not appreciate something like this?
It's absolutely incredible. So according to Darren Ravel, the sandwich at the Lions game yesterday was assembled by the fan for about $65.94 plus tax. It looks like it was assembled the tower from 6 individual turkey club sandwiches that were purchased at the Blitz Grab and Go Market at Ford Field. So this man had to do a little bit of work. And I'm going to be honest, Dad, for one guy, now we don't know if he shared with the section. We don't know if he was taking bits of this off. It's a good means of storage, but obviously very inefficient if you're going to try and do anything other than pluck individual Sammys off the top of this, what I'd imagine is a pretty solid spire going up the gut.
I mean, let's be honest about this thing, right? All right, not easy to eat, to take apart and eat. Also, when we say make a sandwich, I mean, he just put a stick through a bunch of sandwiches, right? I mean, he just stacked sandwiches and put a stick through them, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
he did it for attention.
How much credit are we really giving him for making this unbelievable sandwich? He just bought a bunch of sandwiches and stuck a big stick through them. So I don't know if I'm willing to go out on a limb and saying, wow, what a moment here. I'm not going to lie.
He's making a scene.
So you're not impressed?
He's making a scene. Come on.
Making a scene, he's making a statement that being well-fed is important. This sounds like the people that are arguing against Jason Kelce. I've seen this pop up a lot the last couple of days where everyone's getting on Jason Kelce saying this was a look at me Louis move and he was trying to make a scene there. I even saw some people start to go as far as saying, oh, it was nice of Jason to do this to take some of the heat off of Taylor Swift, who's constantly been this focus of everyone's eye from the outside. The man did it because he's drunk as hell and likes taking his shirt off. It's a pretty easy order of operations to see going there. So while it ends up being for attention, I still want to give everybody, I think, the respect they're owed in their respective fields here. I don't know Anonymous Sandwich Man, but I like to imagine he's someone that's knee-deep in the game of making sure that he's well-fed.
Well, I'm good with that. I mean, I'm definitely good with that. But as far as, creativity. Again, he took ready-made sandwiches and stuck a stick through them. So there's part of me that's
you see anyone else in the stadium do it?
But what was the goal here? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because keeping them in their individual, I don't know how they come, but I'm assuming they're packaged or they're in something, would be easier. So what was the goal?
Would it be easier to have a bunch of little sandwiches sitting around you in various containers that you've got to try and balance or juggle, or having them all in one very convenient large cylinder that you can then pluck from after? I think there's more form in this than you're giving, or more function in this than you're giving it credit for.
Do you think this is comfortable? He's gonna sit there like this for the whole game with his hand up, holding this thing with all the sandwiches.
Oh no! See, I think we're seeing him in the midst of the creative process here. I think when you're actually letting it fly, you take one of the containers that you had before, you put it on the ground, and then you sit this thing right between your legs on top of that container so it's not touching the floor at Ford Field, but you can just reach down then and pluck sandwiches whenever you need them.
I mean, that would be more efficient, yes.
I got to imagine he shared a bunch of these sandwiches with people, right? Because there's no way he's eating all that.
I don't know.
So.
I mean, I don't know. He's sitting there by himself. It doesn't look like...
He is sitting by himself.
I do hope he had family members or friends coming back to that area, because that's the only thing I'd say is if it's just you, that's pretty wasteful in the name of doing it for the gram. It would not be the most wasteful thing we've seen. I think there was that kid on TikTok that coated his entire parents' kitchen in chocolate that one time that looked like doo-doo, but this would be right up there, especially at stadium prices.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Like I said, I guess, Mike, I'm looking for a little more creativity. I guess normally I'm not ripping somebody who has to do with a lot of food, so I'm a little disgusted with myself right now, but I expected something a little different.
Wow.
So this guy's name is John Robinson. He is a Troy, Michigan resident. He's been a Lions season ticket holder for 15 years. So this is a guy who's been there a while. We don't know if he's acted out like this before. We don't know what his general MO is, but he has been coming there for a while. So I'd imagine there's probably, especially as a season ticket holder, people in his section there at each home game. He builds it. Oh, wow. He does this at each home game?
The sandwich thing?
Oh, my God.
He does the sandwich thing at each home game.
See, this is why we needed this Lions run to happen, so that this has been uncovered. He said, he told M Live, I've been doing this for a long time, and I made that sandwich on Sunday a little bigger just because it's the playoffs. Understood the gravity of the moment and went all out because he knew his team needed the boost there. That's a team player.
All right, I'll give him that. That's a team player, and I'm sure the people around him, like I said, are happy because he's got to be sharing that sandwich. There's just no ways down in that whole thing. So I'd imagine the people around him are pretty happy as well. I'll give him kudos to that. He's consistent. Doing it for all the games, that's consistency.
I will
do like
just
that.
say really quickly, if I don't know him and I'm just sitting down, he offers me a sandwich, I'm not taking it.
Oh, man. If you catch me like Jason Kelce, 9 Labatt Blue Lights deep at that point, I am going to absolutely house my sandwich with Johnny Robinson. All right, as we mentioned off the top of the show here, no, you are not late for that thing. No, your appointment is still tomorrow. But yes, today is now officially going to operate as a Wilder Wednesday spiritually, as our friend Charlotte Wilder, co-host of Oddball with Amin El Hassan, joining us now here on a Tuesday. Charlotte, what's going on, buddy?
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for adjusting and making my life easier by having me on this Tuesday. I'm sorry to everybody at home who now thinks it's Wednesday. You actually do have 4 more days of work, not 3. Oh. But, you know, we're going to get through it together, right?
There would be some people that would be happy to say, oh, my God, it's Wednesday already, and then realize,
I know,
no,
that's why.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay, because think about it, the way it worked out. You get to come on today when we had some unbelievable scoring last night in the NBA. I mean, with Joel Embiid throwing up 70, Cat throwing up 62, and even Kevin Durant 43 in their win over Chicago. But it all starts, Charlotte, with what Joel Embiid did. I mean, scoring 70. They actually won the game, unlike Minnesota and Karl-Anthony Towns, which we'll get to. But this guy just keeps impressing us more and more. But it's still the but until he gets the ring on his finger.
Well, I couldn't believe it because, I didn't have the game on for the first half. And then my husband was like, Joel has 56 at the third, and it's the third quarter. And I was like, sorry, what? So, of course, immediately turned the game on, and then he couldn't miss. It's like I think we've gotten so used to centers who can score like this. But to see it happen, and he just doesn't miss. They kept feeding him, and he kept hitting. And to get to that 70-point mark, which no one had done as a Sixer, Tom Ziller, who writes Good Morning, It's Basketball, the newsletter, who's one of my favorite newsletters on Substack. Go follow it. He had one of the greatest titles he's ever had, which was the 76er. And I was like, oh, okay.
Man.
Well, what more could I possibly add to this conversation than Tom?
It's a beautiful pun to kind of set the table for this. You're absolutely right. And that newsletter is fantastic. Everyone should go check that out. It is a wonderful way to start to your day. Be good to each other.
Yes.
Charlotte, I thought it was interesting thinking about the eventuality from last night that is possible, because this happening for the 76ers, who are always going to be in contention for the East as long as Joel Embiid is there, and are seen as that team that, kind of like Denver last year, needed to take that next step. Would this be the year, especially given the tear that Joel has been on as of late? Would this be finally the year where they could get over the hump like that? And staring on the other side at Karl-Anthony Towns, albeit in a losing effort, who scores 62 points for the Timberwolves, who are first place in the Western Conference and so are seen as real contenders now. The Rudy Gobert trade seems to actually be taking teeth. This idea that we could get, and have been getting as of late in the playoffs, a lot more great big man matchups in a day and age where it seemed like for a while we were skewing so far away from that. Overall, is that something that in your mind is good? Because I do feel like the NBA is a place where we've always historically kind of lionized big men, and it's kind of cool to see a new generation of them with a new skill set starting to really dominate this league the way they have in the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing is, these are big men who can hit threes. Like, I think when we were talking about Steph and revolutionizing the game, and Daryl Morey with his analytics, and then Sam Hinkie, trust the process, like all of that stuff feels so long ago, because now you have guys who are this big and are hitting threes at rates that just didn't, I don't know if it seemed possible years ago for anybody, let alone the big men. And so I think it's extremely cool. Vincent Goodwill at Yahoo Sports wrote about how, Karl-Anthony Towns and Joel on the same night, both having over 60-point games, just shows, what a new era of the NBA we're in. And I also think something funny to me that is not to diminish what Joel did, but he did it against the Spurs, who are very, very bad. And then Karl-Anthony Towns lost. So I do think that there are some sort of funny little not caveats, but things that probably it would be great if it were against like the greatest team in the league and both of them won both times. But that's not always how this works. So, yeah, I think it's great. I love watching the NBA today. And I think that a lot of people get really caught up in like, what does it mean? Is it big men? Is it threes? Is it small ball? Is it like blah, 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 blah. And it's like, to me, is it fun to watch? Like, do you like watching it is what I come down to over and over again. I think the same conversations are sometimes had in the NFL. I think across sports leagues, you're just seeing a lot more offense. And to me, that's really fun. I don't, sure, you love a defensive stop and it's fun to watch that too. But I don't think it's something to like wring our hands over or say, well, are they scoring too much? Is this too much of a good thing? It always seems to me that it's an individual preference. And if you like what's going on, then yes, I think it's great.
I think it's one of those things where there's always a fine line. Like if the game started to look like the NBA All-Star games the years past, we would probably start to see the meter going the other way. But Dad, Charlotte's right. It's the how this happens. And Joel Embiid is a good micro example of that last night, where the things that he can do at that size as a scorer, as a passer, from close, from distance, all of them seem like they would have been impossible for so many people so long ago. And now we have seen in this era that we've talked about ushered in, big bodies adjust. And every sport is about how you sort of make use of the resources around. And the fact that the NBA now has this army of 7-foot monsters who can stretch the floor, who can ball handle, who are elite passers, it's created my favorite thing in sports, which is people that are so physically inaccessible to me. I watch sports because I want to see freaks of nature do things that I could never even have dreamed of. And the NBA's got that in droves right now at a pivotal juncture for the league.
Well, being the elder statesman of this group here, I was watching the NBA way, way back in the day when it was, those fives just went down in the paint, got the ball, tried to back it in, and you had big men battles. That was it. So we've evolved, much like the quarterback in college that would go to the NFL a while ago, and no matter what they did in college, it was like, forget all that. You're in the NFL now. You're playing quarterback this way. To now where you have these unbelievably gifted quarterbacks and the pros are saying, why don't we use their ability? So I think we've seen that evolve with the big men, Charlotte, where they're not, normally it was you were big, get down in the paint. That's where you play. It's evolved to, okay, now they're better athletes. Let's see what happens when we spread them out on the floor. And I think that's, without question, been one of the biggest changes in the games. We're used to great athletes on the floor. I've always said I think NBA players are the best athletes in the world. And we're used to great athletes, but now we're seeing them at 7 foot and above being great athletes where you really can't appreciate it unless you're really at a game and you see in front of you how big these people are and how well they move.
I couldn't agree more. I think, Mike, to your point, yes, obviously we still want defense. But I think we do have players who, the fact that Draymond Green, for example, has become such a household name, and the fact that he has, for all of his antics and, the occasional choking somebody out on the court, speaking of the Timberwolves, I do think that he has proved that there is still a place in this league for players to be lionized because of the defense that they play. And I think also with the big men, yes, Senior, I totally see what you're saying of how the game has shifted. I still think, though, that we see that. Like, when you picture Nikola Jokic, a lot of times I picture him like backing up into the paint. Last night with Joel, a lot of his shots were mid-range. Excuse me, my brain just decided to like stop mid-sentence with my mouth. A lot of the shots that we saw last night from Joel were mid-range jumpers. And he was backing up and he's still contesting shots on the other side. So I don't think it hasn't tipped over in that direction yet. I do think, though, it's sort of telling that a guy like Victor Wembanyama, who Joel was playing against last night after the game, someone stopped him. And when he heard what both Embiid and Cat had done, he was like, and any given night, guys can score 50, 60, 70, 80. And I think it's also, this is 18 years to the day last night that Kobe Bryant had his 81-point game. And there's something that in that time frame does sort of stop you in your tracks, and you say, oh, this is different. This is different now. And a guy like Wembanyama is perhaps the most freakish, and I mean that as a compliment, the most athletically out of this world specimen that you could see this from. He obviously doesn't play in a good team. He hasn't probably had the chance to show fully what he can do. But even the fact that we're showing highlights of this guy on a team that nobody cares about right now, who can block a shot and hit a three from practically the logo, is like, oh, something changed. I don't know if everybody got taller and we have better development programs for tall people, but like Mike, it's like that to me is what I delight in. What you were saying about these watching something for something you can't do or you can't even fathom. Sometimes after I watch the NBA, I'll go and watch highlights of college, or I'll even watch highlights of high school games, because I just need to show myself how not normal this is, how absurd the ability is, because otherwise you get used to it and you see someone standing next to Joel and you think, well, he's short and he's like 6'7", So it's important to get that context too, to see what these guys are doing, how absolutely absurd it is.
Yeah, I cannot stress enough. Charlotte is absolutely right. If you want a full appreciation for what you're seeing skill-wise and ability-wise at the pro level, just watch the college sport version of whatever you're watching there. As someone who covers college football and then snaps into the NFL every weekend, it's like a different sport, especially at so many key positions. And so much of what you talked about there, Charlotte, because I agree with you. The cool part about Joel Embiid is he can do everything. He gives you that old school stuff, but he can also flex out and ball handle and hit threes on occasion, even if that wasn't a huge part of his output last night. And in any sport right now, we're seeing a premium paid on optionality. It's why in the NFL, you're seeing some more teams flex in tight again. The use of a lot of the tight end personnel groups in the Shanahan-McVay trees is because you've got to be able to show defenses a lot of options and give them that conflict that you're trying to create down in, down out, or play in, play out in the NBA. It's why on the other side, it makes Karl-Anthony Towns always such an interesting discussion point in the NBA, because Karl-Anthony Towns is special and unique in his own way, but like a very large plant that's in bloom, he sometimes can topple over, and they basically had to bring in Rudy Gobert to be the plant stick that you see in a garden that like a tall cactus is tied to so it can stay upright. Rudy Gobert is there to do the defense. He's there to do the tough stuff on the block. And then you allow Karl-Anthony Towns to go out there and be, as he has professed himself in his own mind, the best shooting big man in NBA history. So he doesn't have to do a lot of that stuff. And so Karl always is going to fight an interesting battle because he says some very funny things like that when he goes on podcasts. But it is funny how they basically brought in Rudy to say, you're going to do they outsourced old big man stuff. They said, Rudy, you got all that. Karl, you can do the fun stuff that you clearly like doing way more. And now they've gotten to this point where it somehow actually works.
That's so true. That's so funny. Rudy is like the, he's also like the guy on a film set that they bring in to like, can you stand on this actor's mark while we get the shot all set up and make sure that everything looks right and good so that the other guy doesn't have to stand here. It's like there's this some sort of, and at the same time, like he can't. He's a stunt double. Rudy Gobert might be a stunt double, and he also has not. I think a lot of people in Utah would be like, yeah, okay, well, see what happens when you actually need him to go off a cliff for you or something. But I think somehow it's strangely working in Minnesota. But last night, against the Hornets, there was this moment where, because we had talked on Oddball last week about, I was like, look, the Timberwolves are legit. Like, I know that I think a lot of the stuff with fans' reactions to the Thunder and the Timberwolves, particularly if you're not a hardcore NBA fan, if you've been watching the NFL and then as that season winds down, as there are fewer games, you go over to the NBA, you'd be like, oh, I'm sorry, what? Like, the Thunder and the Timberwolves are two of the best teams in the league. And I don't think it's that we don't take them seriously or that they're not for real. I think it's that it takes probably a full cycle and playoff appearances for fans to get into their heads that these teams are good, that this is a real contender. I think you need fans' minds are sort of a year behind what is actually happening now. And so to watch the Wolves last night was the first time where I was like, I got a little worried, because at the end of the game, Karl has 60 points. And at the end of the game, he gets fouled. The refs don't call it. I thought it was a foul. He's complaining as Leaky Black on the Hornets goes to the free throw line. But I was like, oh man, if it comes down to a foul on a night where this guy has 60 against the Hornets, something about that made me. And I know it's just one game, and I know that you can't extrapolate further than that. But there was a thought of like, okay, maybe something might not be fully complete there.
Well, that's what we do with teams we're not used to seeing at the top, right? Is can they stay at the top? Like we're by games. I know we call the All-Star weekend the halfway point. We're past the halfway point, right? I mean, from a game standpoint, and Minnesota and OKC are still there. They're still at the top. And I think, Mike, that's hard for us to fathom. We see that sometimes early in the season, and then we see them fall off, and we're like, well, they can't hold that. We're used to seeing Boston there, Milwaukee there, Philadelphia there, Denver up there now in the West. And it took a while, I think, for them until they closed the deal finally. Now I don't know what the buy-in is with Minnesota and Oklahoma City as far as can they do this throughout the regular season and then make an imprint in the postseason.
Dad, I think you're exactly right. And Denver was the team I originally thought of, but I think you could even lump in the Toronto Raptors from years ago in LeBron James's Eastern Conference, who were perennially near the top or the one seed there, because we've so devalued the NBA's regular season based on what we've seen in terms of postseason results that a lot of times we looked at that. Denver for a long time elicited an eye roll when they'd spend multiple seasons at number one, but then we'd watch Nikola Jokic win an MVP and get ousted pretty early in the playoffs. And it took a long time for that to build up. For the Raptors, it took them acquiring Kawhi Leonard and LeBron James leaving the Eastern Conference for all that to come together. But I think you're absolutely right. In Charlotte, I would agree where it's twofold. One, it takes fans a while to catch up because we're used to, especially in the NBA, because injury is so much less of a factor than the NFL, talent can hold over years for a lot longer. It's easier to buy in to the way a team's constructed because we know what the parts are capable of. But I do think it's also until we see you do it in the postseason, because Stu Gatz and others have helped incept that into everybody's brain. But even players structure their season like that. We see teams that have been to and know they're going to make deep postseason runs are only going to expend so much meaningful effort during the regular season that a team like Minnesota, who clearly with their head coach who was miserable watching that game go on the other night, watching them there, calling it a disgusting brand of defensive basketball, they're clearly approaching the regular season different than a lot of their counterparts.
Yeah, I also think that this year, I don't know if it's because of the TV deal, I don't know if the load management stuff the NBA has been trying to impart, whatever, has been working. I think that we've seen a lot more star players more regularly. I think that I've seen some pretty hard fought games in the regular season, and it's been really fun. And I hope that people see that as, sure, you could say the regular season doesn't matter. How do you get to be a one seed? Like that, that's when it matters. And so I think it'll be very interesting going into these playoffs this year to see that play-in tournament shape up, because that's sort of where it's like, okay, are you for real? Can you do it?
It is interesting to consider it that way, Charlotte, because you're right. And I think between the tournament, which we talked about, the in-season tournament being a huge success, and you're right, we saw a player like Kawhi Leonard play so much more through the first half of the season than we've traditionally been used to. And I don't think it's all correlation, causation necessarily, but coming off a summer where we saw Major League Baseball's rule changes with the pitch clock absolutely work and become a net positive for the sport, the NBA turned around, made some changes of its own, and so far there do seem to be, at least anecdotally, positive returns on their investment.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Okay, Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, they are iconic. Need I say more? They held the record for most postseason touchdowns by a QB receiver duo. Notice I said held, though, past tense, because Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce passed them by hitting the magic number 16, surpassing that previous record of 15. Tom Brady took to Twitter to acknowledge, he said, "Beasts, when you one-up Gronk, you're doing something right." They also one-upped you, Tom. Patrick Mahomes, 8-2 in the playoffs, went down 7+ points, though, guys. And his 2 losses were to Tom Brady. So this was inevitable that we would get to this point where we're having conversations like this. But, like, what do we make of the Brady-Mahomes conversation? Who's the GOAT? Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, it is the basest form of sports talk radio there is, but it also is, I don't know, to me it's fun. Like, this was the same way I felt about LeBron James in the midway point of his career when it seemed like it was possible that we were going to have these Jordan comparison arguments. And I shouldn't even say midpoint in his career. I mean, I was in a locker room in 2011 and we were doing LeBron Jordan debates every other day and just watching the place devolve into madness. But Charlotte, for someone that grew up obviously getting to watch the Brady run up close and personal in New England and what that meant, there is always something to me selfishly as a sports fan that I love about the excitement of knowing I have the potential to say that in my sports watching lifetime, when I was, in the prime of my career watching this, I got to see the greatest person to ever do their thing. And the notion that we could get someone this closely on the heels of what Tom Brady just did, who not only, I mean, Patrick Mahomes physically is a better quarterback than Tom Brady ever could have hoped to have been. If you were drafting on skill sets alone, they'd be nowhere close, and that was true for Brady and a lot of guys. But the fact that Pat is already stacking accomplishment early in his point in his career, Charlotte, to be able to be in this conversation, to me is exciting. I don't know how you receive it as a New England Patriots fan.
Honestly, Mike, when Kelce caught that touchdown and the announcers were like, "Oh, now they have more than Brady and Gronk," I did get a little emotional. And I think it's because I feel the exact same way you do. I used to say, like, "Oh my God, we're so lucky to be able to watch Brady on this team. I'm so lucky that I can root for him as, like, the team I am a fan of." Also, I felt that way about LeBron. I remember in the 2016 finals watching LeBron play basketball, being like, "Holy cannoli," to quote Klay Thompson. We are so lucky I'm so lucky to be alive when this guy is playing sports. And I sort of feel that way with Kelce and with Mahomes and Kelce. I think Patrick Mahomes, watching the Chiefs, I had this very bizarre feeling the other night where I was like, "Oh my God, the Patriots have been bad for 4 years now." I felt this weird, I don't know whether it's also because, Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, but all of a sudden I was like, are the Chiefs my side piece team? Like, am I into the Chiefs in a way that, like, I've been inceptioned because they've been so good in the way the Patriots were so good that A, I have to respect it, and B, it's the team I watch the most because they have the most primetime games. Like, am I the kid in LA who's like, "I'm a Patriots fan" in 2009? Like, I had to stop myself for a second. But I think it's crazy that we are, as you said, talking about this, the statistic of Patrick Mahomes. If he wins a Super Bowl, he will have the most playoff wins behind only Tom Brady and Joe Montana. Is the sort of thing where it's like, well, we never thought we'd say Brady, someone could do what Brady did. It felt out of reach. And then you watch a guy like Mahomes do this and you think, oh, okay, well, he's still pretty young. So we shall see, guys. Do you feel any sort of fondness? I wonder, obviously, as broadcasters, that's not the point, but do you feel any sort of familiarity, bias in your heart at all for these Chiefs?
I don't know if it's biased, Dad. Like, how do you feel, Dad, as someone who's ingested far more
biased.
football than Charlotte or I?
Fondness.
Yeah.
I listen. First off, let me say really quickly that we talked about Joe Montana. Terry Bradshaw won 4 Super Bowls as well, so let's not leave out the real old guy as well. So I just wanted to give Terry his due as well. I think where we are with the Chiefs now is they get the benefit of the doubt always, in my eyes. It's like, are you going to pick? We both picked against the Chiefs for Buffalo, and I felt dirty doing it. And I've already felt dirty saying I think they're going to lose to Baltimore. And I'm waiting for myself to be wrong because they always find a way. And I know it's with Mahomes, but man, how about hearing it for the boy? How about Andy Reid? This is Andy Reid's 11th championship game, right? He had 5 in Philadelphia. Now he lost in his Super Bowl there. One of the reasons he was gone, he couldn't win it. And this is his 6th in Kansas City. I mean, he's another walk-in Hall of Fame guy as well. But I think they're at the point, Mike, where they get the benefit of the doubt. Even though we're picking against them, I feel we're doing it because they always seem to find a way. I don't think they're going to do it this week, but it won't shock me if they do. And Tom Brady deserves every comparison that he's getting right now to Tom Brady because it's always, well, it's Pat, so he's got a chance because of the way he plays. You put it exactly right. I was watching the Chiefs and I said, this is what it felt like to be a Patriots fan. It felt like no matter what happens, Patrick Mahomes will find a way. The team will rally around him and they will all do their part to make sure that they don't leave this game as losers. I had this flash of a moment where I was like, that's what I have missed watching. I think that's what I mean when I say fondness, is this like the belief in the magic of what this team is doing and knowing you can't count them out.
I think that's exactly right. And it's interesting how they got to that point too, right? Because they did the comparison yesterday on First Take of Brady and Mahomes' first 7 years in the NFL. And both of them, 3 AFC titles. Brady had 3 Super Bowls to Pat's 2. Brady was 12-2 in the playoffs. Mahomes is 13-3. Mahomes has 2 regular season MVPs. Brady had none at that point, and he's grossly outpaced him in yards and touchdowns because Pat had to come in and immediately be late career Brady, where the offense is the star of the show from 07 and beyond, when all of a sudden they started actually churning out points. And now Pat's getting to the point where they've tightened down the ship. They used more 3 tight end sets in their game on this past weekend in the divisional round than they did in any game this season. They did a lot of that last year too, but it's like the early Patriots where they could rely on defense to help out the quarterback there and offset some of what they didn't have on offense at that point. And so Pat came in and immediately wowed us with all that, which I think is also part of why people are so thirsty for Mahomes to be mentioned in that same vein, is because it's easier to see it with him. Like Brady is with what we've talked about with Brock Purdy and some of these guys. Brady's just the giga version of that, where there's no meaningful physical skill. There's no extra effort play. There's not a thing you could point to other than ruthless efficiency, especially in clutch moments and in playoff moments for Tom Brady. Whereas Mahomes falls in that group of athlete, like I've always described with Connor McDavid in the NHL, where I don't have to know a lot about the sport to know that guy's better at it than everybody else he's playing with. And with Pat, that's so much easier to see than even a guy like Tom Brady, who was so great for so long.
So, Charlotte, I think one of the differences could be, now Andy Reid's 65, he's been coaching a long time, is while Tom had to do it with a lot of different players, he had one coach. Pat may have to do it with a different coach to go the level of Tom, right? Unless Andy's going to coach until, his early to mid 70s. That might be one of the big differences between the two.
Yeah, I think that is probably, I would love to actually get into that. I know the clock is ticking down here. I'd love to get into that a little bit more in the next segment, because I had a thought that you guys sparked in my head after last week about Belichick. But I do think that Mahomes hopefully he's gotten the best coaching you can get. So doing it with someone else, maybe it's a situation where they might listen to him more than they might listen to another player, or where he has the weight and experience to be like, no, actually, I think we should do it this way. And the coach will be like, okay, you're Patrick Mahomes. I'm going to give what you say a little more weight and try not to impose my own will as much. And if they don't do that, they're probably maybe not the greatest coach and they shouldn't be coaching you.
Yeah, it is a very interesting point that I think we can stick with, is that is going to be the reality at some point. And it does make the conversation about both Andy Reid's place in NFL coaching history compared to a guy like Bill Belichick and Patrick Mahomes' comparison to a guy like Tom Brady as we continue to go down and develop his career, and how accounting for that massive difference, who your partner is along the way and what it does for your overall trajectory. So we've evolved from just the Brady and Mahomes comparison to now considering them with their coaching counterparts in Andy Reid and Bill Belichick. Also, in Charlotte, I know you wrote about on your Substack, which everyone should make sure they check out as well, the wilderthings.substack. The relationship between coach and quarterback that for so long has been the subject of a lot of intrigue, especially in New England, and how interesting it is to kind of use that as a compare contrast with Andy and Patrick Mahomes, because like we said, at some point, Pat's going to have to do this without Andy based on where he's at in his coaching career. So we're going to find out what he looks like without that particular context around him in a way that we already know about Andy Reid because of what he did in his time in Philadelphia, where he didn't win a Super Bowl, but 4 straight NFC titles and appearance in the Super Bowl is pretty damn impressive and an overwhelming success at another completely different team in another completely different circumstance. So in a weird way, Andy Reid and Tom Brady have a lot in common in that regard because they have both answered the question about what they look like away from the success of the other person that they've been tied to in a way that now Bill Belichick might find out soon and Patrick Mahomes is going to eventually in a way that's very intriguing to me.
I think that's true, Mike. I think also with Patrick Mahomes, his raw athleticism gives him more of the benefit of the doubt than I think that Brady or Belichick got, because those two were kind of on the same level in terms of ruthless accuracy. As you said earlier, Bill would come up with these crazy game plans and his defense was always, I mean, they don't win the Super Bowl in 2019 if it's not for Bill's defense, but Brady is obviously, as Bill Barnwell wrote this great piece in ESPN about how of course, Bill deserves some of the success or credit for the success. But when you, Senior, you said, Bill wants to keep coaching to catch up to Don Shula's record. It made me think, I actually feel like he probably wants to keep coaching to prove he can do this without Brady. I think that he really muffed an opportunity to do that in New England. If Belichick had won a Super Bowl without Tom Brady in New England, I do not think he would still be coaching. I think that there is an element of this that he wants to prove that he can do this without Brady. And I think that Bill is such an enigma that it might not even be a conversation about his legacy or about how we all remember him. I feel like he might want to prove it to himself. He might want to be like, hey, I can do that. I know that I can do this without a quarterback who's the greatest of all time. I need to go somewhere else to prove that. I think that he would do well to not be the GM of the team where he tries to do that, even though that worked for a long time for him. But it was interesting when I started thinking about it, of the pieces that he may or may not need and why he might continue coaching and going to somewhere completely new, in a way that I think Mahomes has that ability, that freakish ability we talked about earlier with like Victor Wembanyama, where he can make a throw with his eyes closed behind his back. You can't see that in a coach the way you can in an athlete. And I feel like that might be a driving factor here. Now, I'm not in Bill's head, but it made me think that that's probably part of what's going on here.
Oh, I agree, because, they're human beings. And you saw Tom win away from Bill, but Bill not win away from Tom. The one thing I may disagree on, Charlotte, even if he won a Super Bowl without Tom, I think he wants Don Shula's record. He's so close to it. I mean, there's 15 wins, and he's going to go down as the greatest coach anyway. So I think on a personal note, I think that's a record that he would like to get, while proving he can win without Tom. I think that was a big thing right out of the gate, since Tom won a Super Bowl not long after leaving Bill. I do think Bill would like to get Don's record.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely that part in there as well, baked into a lot of this. But it does, I think, make a lot of these barbershop arguments a little bit more fun when now we're going to get a look at this the same way we were so excited to see Brady leave. And I think we've made a lot of NBA comparisons to all of these guys in the midst of this, and certainly with the notion that Pat might have to do it without his partner in Andy Reid, the way that Tom Brady was able to stick with one team for so long. It is very LeBron and Jordan-esque. I saw Bomani Jones make the comparison yesterday, and I think it's more apt here that Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady is more Tiger Woods to Jack Nicklaus than it is to anything else in sports, where even if Pat doesn't catch Tom Brady in overall titles, there's going to be a lot of people that if he's close enough are going to look and say, yeah, we believe based on what we see, that guy is clearly the better football player, and we'd be pretty comfortable saying it much the same way that people have been with Tiger. I realize as we've been going along, we've been doing a lot of numbers, and I'd imagine somewhere Mike Wilbon is very ticked off about that right now. Did you guys see a lovely newest installment of Mike Wilbon's War Against Analytics yesterday on PTI? I think we have the sound here, but coming off a weekend where we saw Todd Bowles go for 2 in a very unique spot and some of the normal math around football that's crept in, get into the TV screens on the divisional round weekend, Mike Wilbon on PTI yesterday got very, very upset at the mere thought.
Don't start me with the 2-point conversions and the analytics say go for it. Do the analytics say go for it no matter who's going for it? So if you and I were on the field, the analytics say go for it. It's the stupidest, laziest, lamest thing I've ever heard for reasoning in competition. And I hate when announcers just buy it without questioning it.
Wow. Now, I enjoy the irony of the fact that Mike Wilbon, who clearly has not asked any of the analytics people at ESPN about an explanation of what will go into this, calling the coaches using this strategy that their jobs depend on lazy. I do think part of that is hilarious. I also, Dad, wonder from your perspective, because you are much closer to being peers with Mike Wilbon than either of us are, of how you kind of view this rejection of modern football and the things that come with it from one of the guys that's been at the helm of the sports industry for a really long time.
Listen, he said the analytics say go for it, but that doesn't mean you have to go for it. I mean, people talk about analytics, especially in football, as being this big thing now. There were analytics when I played and analytics before I played. We got game plans every week which told us whatever down and distance what a team was going to run, the percentages of them running to the right or to the left, of pass, of run. I mean, that was all broken down. That's analytics, is it not? I mean, it's numbers in a sport, it's numbers in football. And that's where, because I was an average athlete, I had to digest that. I had to know it's 3rd and 7+. Okay, I know they're in this formation X amount of times, this formation this percentage of times, and they're in that formation this percentage of time. There's a good chance they're going to run one of 3 different plays from this. This was all going on. This is nothing new. This is stuff that we had to know and digest to help give us an advantage. It wasn't a marker that said it's exactly going to happen. It's just numbers that say these are what our numbers say in watching this team on what we think is going to happen. Does it always happen? No. That's why I don't mind. We hear it in baseball as well. At times a manager gets criticized for going with his gut. Charlotte, it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can have all the numbers at your disposal and still say, okay, I get that number, but the way this game is going today, I'm going to kick the extra point instead of going for the 2-point conversion. So I don't mind people saying the analytics say, because my game plan would say there's a high percentage this is going to be this play, but that still doesn't mean I think they might go somewhere else. So I don't mind the analytics. It doesn't mean you have to follow them all the time.
Well, I think the place that analytics get a bad rap is they're called analytics and they're not called information and probability.
Yes.
Basically, numbers are just a different way of saying, here's what can happen sometimes, here's what can happen other times. Mina Kimes obviously had a great TikTok and reel on Instagram talking about why people do this and how there's over the last 8 years or so, it's up 30% from what it was in terms of going for 2 when you need 8 points. And it's just math. She was like, it's just how it adds up. You can do it or you cannot do it. And I think that the analytics needs to be rebranded as information. And then I think a lot of these arguments might go away.
It's decision science. And to Dad's point, it's all about what gives us the best chance to win. And I'm constantly amazed in the most hyper-aggressive sport that we have that so many people would rather take the conservative option that strings the game out and basically says, we hope something good will eventually happen. When what we're talking about, 4th and 1 decisions, 2-point decisions, are saying you got 2 or 1 yards to go to your goal that gives you a chance to win. Make a play. That seems to me the most football thing ever, and instead we've outsourced it to the nerds. All right, guys, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, the third, 3 quick stories to send you off into the rest of your day. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review. Leave us a 5-star rating and try and check us out here live if you can, Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern. On the DraftKingsNetwork.com, the YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, and more. You can also catch Oddball with Charlotte Wilder and Amin El Hassan in those said same spots here on the DraftKings Network as well. Not at the same time, but on the same network. You get the gist. And wherever you get your podcast, you can download, subscribe, rate, review them both if you miss any of them in real time. Our thanks to Charlotte Wilder for joining us today on a Tuesday, not a Wilder Wednesday, as we've noted there. But guys, let's get to this, that, and the third today. And start off with this. Charlotte, we didn't get a chance to talk about all the Taylor Swift and Jason Kelce of the game over the weekend between the Chiefs and the Bills, which was incredible, as was the Taylor Swift subreddit that started making its way over to Twitter during a lot of the game, where the diehard Taylor Swift fans, the kind of subsect that might not have been NFL fans before, were all digesting the game for the first time. And some of them, like SoCal Fat Chick, saying, I feel like I want to cry and puke and also like I can't breathe. I'm assuming this is fairly normal for this kind of game. Pageant Trella says, what is a touchback, in all caps? And then at some point, someone, I think, tried to cut Mecole Hardman, which is where NFL Twitter realized that we are not all that different from our Swiftie counterparts. So, Charlotte, what was your experience like watching worlds collide in this game and also a shirtless Jason Kelce parachuting into it?
Oh my God, I loved it. I was like, I need replays though. I need replays of the booth, the way, you know how you get replays of a game in slow motion. I know that sometimes they'll toss to that going to commercial, but I need it right after they show it. I need them to show Taylor and Jason and Kylie in the back. Shout out Kylie Kelsey. Yes. Could not have been more excited to see her there. I also, it was the first time I'd tweeted in a while, and I had a tweet go viral because of Jason Kelce. So I just want to say thank you for your service. Taking your shirt off, holding the tiny beer, everybody won.
Everybody won. Everybody won in this. And I love it so much when the football fanatics get mad when they show Taylor Swift. It's just so ridiculous. But I'll ask this question to you, whoever wants to jump in on this one first. Is this, because we know a lot of the Taylor Swift fans, the women who are tweeting, I'm so lost, what's a touchback, now are getting into football because of this. Is this good or bad for their better halves? So say guys love to get together and watch the game. Now all of a sudden, their wife or girlfriend who's a Swiftie and could care less about football wants to say, hey, honey, I'd like to watch the game with you. Or can I go watch the game with you with the guys? Where all of a sudden it's like you have a lot of knowledge of the game. Someone sits there with no knowledge of the game. How was that for you? It reminds me of the Everybody Loves Raymond episode when Ray, who is a big-time golfer, goes golfing and his wife thinks they don't spend enough time together. She knows nothing about golf and goes golfing with him, and they just basically argue and butt heads the whole time. You wonder, is this hurting overall that relationship because guys are used to watching it by themselves. Now they want their girlfriends or their wives want to watch it, but don't really understand the game.
It is.
That's all I'm asking.
Good for healthy relationships, bad for toxic relationships. And ladies, maybe this is how you weed out that you're in a toxic relationship. If your man doesn't want to watch football with you, he doesn't want to explain the rules, he doesn't want you to come along with the boys, then maybe you shouldn't be dating him.
Wow.
The only way that I think it's bad is when men who are dumb realize that their significant others, also maybe women whose husbands get into it because of this, realize that the people who are the newcomers to the game are catching on more quickly and actually have better takes than the people who've been there the whole time.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think this is a good reminder that'll be humbling for a lot of guys out there who believe that they're Vince freaking Lombardi sitting there watching games with their friends, and that none of this is actually that inaccessible, and we should never be gatekeeping to begin with. So, as usual, welcome to our new Swiftie friends. Obviously, a lot of you have been here already because there are a ton of crossover Swiftie NFL fans, like the ones all sitting in this chat on this podcast, but did make for some great content here, and Jason Kelce should keep taking his shirt off. True equality, because I saw people actually pushing back on Jason Kelce hogging airtime during that Bills game in a way people had been accusing Taylor Swift of. So maybe we are finally arriving at something resembling balance
Equality!
in society. Maybe I should say that balance in society, and then I'm going to lead into our next story, Jesse. Let's get to that about the theft of what apparently is now the most precious commodity in America.
Yeah, just kidding. Society is a mess. On January 17th in Roseville, California, a 23-year-old woman stole 65 Stanley Cups. Now, that comes into $2,500 worth of merch, which, as you can see, the cops have lined up like this is the drug bust of the century. You see all the Stanleys right there. I mean, guys, Stanley Cup fever is hitting new highs. I feel like they're not even marketing this cup. It's just the marketing is taking care of itself with the crime.
I did a thing on Pablo Torre Finds Out about the Stanley Cups. There actually was a behind-the-scenes intense marketing effort with influencers and Stanley who came together, and the influencers convinced Stanley to sell the cups in the first place. They weren't doing well in 2019, and these three women of the Buy Guide were like, hey, let us sell them, and they'll sell out. Let us do an influencer marketing program. And now we're here. So it was a little behind the scenes stuff going on. Check out that episode. Shout out to the woman who saw an opportunity to make some money. Maybe shouldn't break the law, but I sort of think it's a little bit metal.
Yeah, I actually, now that you've said that, I am realizing like mom influencers too definitely been pushing the Stanley.
Once it hits the Utah moms, it's off the shelves.
It's gone.
All I have to say is the Stanley Cup, the company making these cups, does not have to spend a dime marketing. Not one dime. Nothing.
Not anymore.
All their cups are out
there. They did
there.
then.
Yeah. I mean, nothing now.
Honestly, the biggest losers in this marketing-wise are the fact that now when I hear Stanley Cup, I no longer think of hockey. Like, they have totally come in and trounced this in the public light. And the fact that hockey has not done a meaningful partnership, at least to my mind, because as the biggest casual, I have not seen it rise to the levels of society that I would normally consume. I don't know what the NHL is doing, because this is a layup in terms of the potential crossover here for your brand to be aligned with now something that is ubiquitous across society in these damn cups that are getting resold on StockX. Like the same pace as people are trying to flip Jordans, people are now trying to flip these Stanley Cups and sell them to other people, so much so that you got guys in cop uniforms treating them like they're kilos of cocaine. That is one of the most incredible pictures I've ever seen. So shout out to the lady for trying to go ahead and flip that thing and make a buck. I'll be interested to see if, like, when people used to do in like cop movies where some of the crooked police officers would steal confiscated drugs, if people are going to be taking confiscated Stanleys home and trying to basically win Christmas.
Depends on the color. Yeah.
That is true. The color and the crossover. Speaking of that, let's get to the third. You talked about something being metal, Charlotte, in the good sense. Let's talk about some bad metal gone wrong in a plane, Jesse.
Yeah, speaking of reasons you might need to call the cops, a New York-bound Virgin Atlantic flight was canceled moments before takeoff last week when an alarmed passenger said he spotted several screws missing from the plane's wing. Engineers were called. They carried out maintenance checks. Turns out, yep, sure was missing some screws, so it didn't take off. You guys, this story blows my mind. The plane would have taken off if the passenger wasn't like, hey, does it look like there might be something wrong with the wing? Is that why you're supposed to keep the windows open during takeoff and landing so you can look for a problem?
I just want to say, as someone who is getting on a plane this afternoon, I feel great right now.
I mean, keep your window open. Check out the wings when you're getting on.
Maybe it would have been okay. Maybe it was like screws that don't matter that much.
They did say there's like 119 of those screws, and so that it actually would have been fine without them, according to the airline people, who I'm sure want to make you believe that right now.
Oh, it's exactly right. I mean, anytime our flight is delayed or canceled or something, a lot of times you never know if you're getting the right reason for it. But if you look out at the wing and see, so I don't care if there's 119 screws and 3 are missing. They're supposed to be there. And this is on a projectile that's in the air full of fuel. I mean, so I'm going to be like, okay, I'm cool with holding off on this flight till we get somebody out there, with a screwdriver getting these, bolts back in or whatever that it takes to get it on there. I ain't messing around with that.
I'll text you guys when I land today.
Yeah, check in.
Please.
Yeah, please. Make sure you walk around the plane like it's a rental car, checking for dings before you get in and ride this thing. If you enjoyed the ride with us, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.